The roster cuts have already started after this final preseason game is in the books. Paul, you are one of very few people across New England that watched that whole game last night. Did you have any big takeaways from last night? What was the thing that might have stuck out to you about yesterday?
I mean, it's a lot of the stuff that people were talking about heading into the game in terms of, like, Kyle Duggar was a big takeaway. And some of the potential depth pieces like Cole Strange, I thought, when he played and more importantly, how he played. He didn't really play very well. My big thing with Strange is if you're going to be a backup on the interior, you need to be able to play all three spots, and he just does not look like he has the ability to play center. The snaps have been erratic. He had one last night even that was not accurate. And he, I thought, struggled just in terms of his assignments. So I don't know if you can keep a backup that isn't necessarily versatile enough to play all three of those spots. They're going to have to figure those things out. But I will say this about Kyle Duggar. And I don't really understand exactly what's going on. I don't know why, the scheme fit is such a problem for him. And he's one of the best players on the team. He's one of you can't make an argument that he's not one of the 53 best players. To his credit, last night, I'm sure he didn't want to be on the field.
Definitely not.
Right?
Yeah.
He played well. He's flying around. He made a couple of big hits in the second half. He's back deep at like that center field kind of role. I think they were playing quarters and, three deep at times. He was where he was supposed to be on a couple of deep balls. And the interception obviously is Jameis being Jameis, throwing the ball to him.
It's about right, 30-30 club, yeah.
Right. But I've seen some veterans in those kinds of spots pout and just mail it in. He didn't. So I don't know what that means. I've never thought that they were going to cut him, and I still don't think they'll cut him. I think they're trying to move him. But I do give him some credit for coming to work last night and playing like a professional. And I know that sounds like maybe damning with faint praise, but I don't think everybody does that. He was out there probably way more plays than he wanted to be, but he did dominate against lesser competition.
I mean, which is what he should be doing as one, like you said, the best players on the roster. I also think, like, when you talk about whether or not to keep him, because you're right, he is one of the 53 best players, no question about it. And financially, it doesn't make a ton of sense to cut him right now versus keep him on the roster. I think and Zoe talked about this earlier this week. One of the things that you might point to and say this doesn't make a lot of sense to have him as around is if he's in the locker room and as a guy that was a captain for this defense, now in a backup role, what's that dynamic like? But to your point last night, I think that kind of shows you that maybe that's a guy that would accept that, or at least not make waves in terms of being a distraction in the locker room if you were to keep him on the roster.
Right, and the other thing would be, you have to be honest with yourself as a coaching staff too. I think you're right. I think Duggar kind of gave you a glimpse to the answer as to how he's going to handle it. He's going to work as hard as he can to get his spot back. The players in the locker room will see that.
Yeah.
And they will understand, why is Kyle Duggar not playing again? If he should be playing.
Right.
When we were talking on our post game last night, I just made the comment, like, can you make an argument that he's not at minimum the second best safety on the team? You want to say Peppers is better? I wouldn't. I think Duggar's a better player than Peppers. But you want to make an argument that Peppers is a better player? Fine. They're very similar kind of guys. I think Peppers is more physical, but they both want to play, that box safety kind of role. You think Peppers is better? Fine. You think Jalen Hawkins and Craig Woodson are better than Duggar? I haven't seen that. Del Pettis is a better option than Kyle Duggar?
No, that's fair.
I haven't seen that. So you can want to move on from him because you don't think he's worth the money, and that's fine. It's your money. It's not mine.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you can make an argument that if he's here and you're paying him, that he shouldn't play. I don't think you can make a strong argument for a football reason for him not to play.
Duggar, Jennings, Kendrick Bourne, all three of those guys, do you think they're going to be on different rosters by the time Tuesday comes along for the 53-man cutdown?
I think there's some combination. I don't think all three of those guys will be here, that's for sure. With Bourne, I wonder if they're going to try to layer in some depth at receiver. Maybe he opens the season on IR. I mean, we haven't really seen him in, 3 weeks at this point, more than 2 weeks anyway. I think they'll probably try to maybe open it on IR, and that way, he takes September off. You kind of see where Kyle Williams is and, where, Keyshawn Boutte, how he looks as, sort of a guy that you're relying on.
Right.
Matt Collins. Those guys are all working out. Maybe, you just leave them on IR or you look to move them at that point or something like that. I don't know. Anfernee Jennings is kind of similar to me to Duggar. Now, I think Duggar's a better player, but Anfernee Jennings, is one of those guys that, the people talk about the scheme fit. And I agree. He's not a sort of run around sideline to sideline kind of guy. He's not amazing. He's a physical, edge setting, run stopping outside linebacker type. That's what he does well.
Yep.
If they don't feel like they need that, then that's fine, but don't get run on. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Their defense has definitely gotten smaller and more athletic. I was listening as I was driving home last night when Greg was on. Greg Bedard was on with Joe and Alex. And I was listening to a little of the conversation. I agree 100% with it. That's what he is. But they've decided to go a little smaller and a little bit more athletic, a little bit more aggressive defensively. That makes you a little susceptible to the run, which I'm fine with. So you might need some guys, stopping the run's been a problem.
Right, we're starting to get gassed a little bit here.
We need to change up personnel a little bit. And again, I'd have a hard time believing that Anfernee Jennings isn't one of your 53 best players.
It's weird, too, because if you read the Andrew Callahan report, and he talks about Duggar and Jennings both being available for trade, it seemed like those two players were going in different directions after the Minnesota game, where you had Jennings, who started running with the practice squad, elevating to the twos, where Duggar has sort of dropped to the place where he is right now. So maybe there is momentum for Jennings. The other surprise last night to me, to be honest with you, was the fact that Keon White was out there and getting the amount of playing time that he did last night.
That's another good one. He's another one that he's kind of going the Duggar route. He started, sort of playing full time, and the last week he's been relegated to the twos. And, on Tuesday's practice, they sort of had you saw a pretty good line of demarcation. There was the guys that you didn't expect to play last night were on one field, and the guys that you figured would be playing were on the other.
Yeah.
Keon White was on the other. Yeah. So you knew he was going to play last night. The other thing that caught me, I don't think he played great either. I thought he got beat on the edge a few times, in the run game. I didn't think he stood out. Let's put it that way. I thought he would have, he should have been able to, Anfernee Jennings, as an example, against Minnesota, is out there playing against inferior players, and he gets 3 sacks.
Yeah. Yep.
I didn't see that from Keon White last night.
Frustrating, by the way, for White, because that's a guy that we came into this year saying that maybe Mike Vrabel is going to unlock all this potential that you see with Keon White, and it feels like it's really sort of trailed off here over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and we had a chance to talk to the defensive coaches, I think, on Tuesday. I think Mike Smith is the outside linebackers, edge. He works with the edge guys. And we sort of, I think Phil Perry asked him a question about unlocking. I think he used that exact term, Tim, that you just did, Keon White. And he thought that what would be really important was for him to find a home, like one spot. And, we didn't really follow up with him as to what that spot is, but he talked a lot about his physicality, his violence, and you could see it. He has great play strength. And when he wins, he generally wins with power, Keon White. So that, to me, lends itself to an interior guy.
Yep.
More so than an edge guy. So if that's his one spot, you've invested a lot in Christian Barmore and Milton Williams. If you're having problems against the run, you're going to go to a big run stuffer like Kairos Tonga.
Yep.
I don't know exactly where Keon White fits. If he's an interior guy, he's probably going to be behind those guys.
Mm-hmm.
So he's another one, third year. Might there be some value to somebody else looking for, a different kind of player? I think there'll be some interesting decisions to be made between now and Tuesday when they have to get down to 53.
If you had to guess, Duggar, Jennings, or I'll throw Keon White in there, which one is the most likely one to not be on the roster at this point next week?
I would probably say Jennings. I think Duggar's going to be hard to move because of his contract, and I think White is still too. The potential's still too high, I think, to give up on. So I would say Jennings out of those three would be the most likely not to be on the roster.
White's one of those guys, too, where it just feels like we've been talking about his potential since he came into the league so far, and you see flashes of it, but at some point, don't you have to also just sit there and sort of be like, I guess this sort of is what it is when it comes to this player, and maybe that potential that we think is going to be unlocked just isn't there, and you have to kind of accept that this guy is sort of the player that he's showing you to be?
I couldn't agree more. And I think that people looked at him as like this dynamic pass rusher. And first of all, that's not what he was in college. And then he has whatever it was against Cincinnati in that opener last year. I want to say like 2.5 or three sacks or something like that. And like, well, look at
here we go. Yeah.
But if you went back and watched the plays, he has, again, his traits are strength, power, violence. He plays with a lot of violence. That's how he wins. His sacks generally come late in the down. It's not like he just, beats a guy off the edge and he's in a blink and the quarterback's under an avalanche. He wins with power and persistence. So, the quarterback holding the ball a little bit, maybe he gets a couple of sacks. The ball's coming out because the secondary's not holding up. That's, he's not going to be the guy to affect the passer. So if you're looking for a 20-sack guy, a 15-sack guy, I don't think Keon White's your guy. But if you're looking for a guy who can contribute as an occasional pocket collapser, who can be a little versatile and do some things, he's very athletic, sideline to sideline, running down screens and things like that. I think he has potential to help.